one, just, so there was no way that Pakistan was going to get out of this framework. The second is that religion became politicized and politics got very much ingrained into, religion got very much ingrained into politics. How could, and the contesting space for either national parties that were not religious or the religious parties, that were religious, uh, it became similar. There was no way that anybody could have wanted to minimize their constituency by moving away from religion. Uh, there is very little space for liberal politics, or forget about liberal, because liberal, the word liberal brings all sorts of thoughts into people's minds. But there is no space for a secular framework in Pakistani politics. Let's not forget, Benazir Bhutto did not do anything with Hudud ordinance. The Qisas and Diyat law. Qisas and Diyat law, which was actually promulgated as an ordinance in 1990, it went on. It became a law under Nawaz Sharif's government. So these politicians were competing for the same space. The larger political space had become, entrenched with religious politics. So there was no possibility. I don't think anyone should expect any political party, be it the PTI, be it the PMLN, be it even the ANP or the MQM. Uh, Claims are made, but nobody would ever want to sacrifice or give up on, uh, the constituency which is built around religious ethos. Again, let's not forget that in Punjab, for instance, there are 20 to 25,000 Deobandi, dedicated Deobandi voters in every constituency. So tell me, if you're any party, the PPP or the PMLN or the PTI, when you go out there to get votes, you can't ignore these people. So power, politics, uh, Pakistan is fundamentally a religious state. We like it or not. And no one has an ability. I mean, I would want, personally, I think that's a bridge that we can never cross, Pakistan becoming a secular state. But what we can do is at least order our relationship with politics and religion in a way where we can have conversations where people don't get killed. A different norm has to be organized, which again, no party shows the tendency to look at that. Uh, and because there is so much inherent instability in the political system, therefore, uh, the easy route, the easy escape always and always is bring religion into it. Sell that. If nothing else sells, if you don't have a development agenda, if you don't have a way to convince people that you mean uh, something good to them, for them, or you can bring changes in their life, then the only thing that parties, political parties, and even state institutions have done is, take recourse to religion. I mean, look at Ziaul Haq. We remember Ziaul Haq's dark uh, 10, 11 years. Um, but remember that he actually began with where Zulfikar Ali Bhutto left him. Uh, don't forget Ahmadiyya Friday, uh, turning, moving holiday, the 1 day holiday from Sunday to Friday, prohibition. And so what Ziaul Haq did then was kind of move it even further. That's one. The other is the international climate. Let's not forget that. I mean, at that point in time, uh, this is something which sell. Uh, the Americans were happy to make the curriculum at the University of Nebraska and to provide to uh, to be taught at madrasas in Pakistan and elsewhere in Afghanistan, which emphasize jihad, which emphasize the particular strand of religious ideology, particular strand of religious history. So internationally and domestically, it worked. And in terms of sectarian Shia Sunni violence, what you also see under Ziaul Haq is that for very political reasons, for very, I would say, purely political reasons, the sectarian conflict between Shia and Sunni was encouraged and given a certain direction. Uh, Not just so it was not just fighting Afghanistan, but also pushing back Iran. Iran, I mean, let's not forget in 1979 there was a revolution in Iran in early part of the of 1979, and which posed issues for Ziaul Haq domestically. And to push back, he encouraged many of these militant groups, which had sectarian agenda.
Uh, Coming to the most recent sectarian events, these massive anti-Shia rallies in Karachi, then following that in Islamabad, uh, who organized them? Who has been funding them? Could you just go over both the domestic forces and the foreign forces that you think might be behind this most recent upsurge, where the main slogan was declare the Shia kafir too, and the Shia being 20% of the population, would, if such a step were to be taken, there would be the chances of a civil war like what we've seen in Lebanon. So who are the forces? What are the forces behind the anti-Shia rallies in Karachi and in Islamabad, both domestic and foreign?
All right. Umar, I think the way I look at it, it's the more recent tension is again very political, and it's political, organizationally political for these different groups and different religious parties that are there that were involved in it. Now, let me go, and of course, there's geopolitical as well. See, firstly, Shia Sunni tension in Pakistan begins to, let me repeat what I said earlier, began to get more serious. We've had tension, let me repeat myself. We've had Shia Sunni conflict starting in 1951, then 1970s, then 75, it begins to kind of intensify. But 1979 is a turn. See, 1979, major thing happens, which is Iranian Revolution. Now that gives the Shias in Pakistan a different sense of power. Unlike Shah of Iran was one of Pakistan's closest allies, but Shah of Iran never owned the Shias of Pakistan. His relationship was a very different relationship with the Shias in Pakistan. Let's not forget, and to remind your listeners, that after Iran, Pakistan is one country with the highest number of Shias in the world. So Shia population is serious. Now, the Islamic Revolution, what happened is that the Islamic regime in Iran took ownership of Shias around the world, including Pakistan. So it provided a certain confidence. And then in response, because if you remember, I'm sure you, and I would like to remind you that when Ziaul Haq, for instance, started to change the economic system, make it Islamic, imposed ushur and zakat, uh, that was contested by the Shia population. And of course, the Zia regime tried to push back. They were not happy with this, with response from the Shia community. And therefore, these non-state actors were encouraged, and so sectarian conflict sets in. Sectarian conflict becomes, it intensifies. And what we see is that there is a political economy then. These groups, the Deobandi groups in particular, the Ahle Hadith groups, they increasingly, they engage in Afghanistan, but they also evolve that ideology, which was anti-Shia. And so there is this, ideological intensification, which is important to remember. Now, what has happened is that we are at a turn in history where global politics is being renegotiated. And this time it's China versus US. That's the larger frame. But the second tier of that geopolitics is that China and Iran relations have improved. China is investing in Iran because after Trump changed the dialogue between Tehran and Washington, which was taking place under Obama, Iran needs help. Iran needed help. We are at a situation, Iran was at a situation where during COVID, there were sanctions, they were being affected by sanctions. Now, here comes China with resources. China is building, for example, the metro in Tehran, is investing in Iranian railway, it's investing its money in Iran, which Iran needs, which will, of course, if it gets more serious, will get Iran away entirely from the United States. But then we're looking at this larger tension between US, Israel, India on one hand, and then you have Iran, China, Russia, Pakistan wants to join in as well. Now, the point that I'm trying to get to is that firstly, this geopolitics, this shift in geopolitics is found threatening by some of these militant groups. And what they're trying to do is draw attention towards their own significance. They're sending a message both to the Pakistani state. They're also trying to send a message to the Chinese state or whoever the players are, that no, they have a significant presence and they should not be undermined. And the whole new geopolitics can be disturbed by this sectarian, thing happening, sectarian violence. So one is that. The other, of course, is that this is connected with the whole shift in Arab world versus Israel relations. For decades, it's the Arab world which is very central to pleading the case for the Palestinians. Now, not so much. Now they're building relations for their political economic reasons, they're building relations with Israel. From UAE to Qatar to Bahrain, not Qatar, sorry, Bahrain, Oman, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia. These are countries with, which are oil economies, and they need to kind of diversify. If they want to survive economically, they need to diversify, and therefore the need to link up with United States and Israel. I'm not for or against it. I'm just giving what the perspective is. And therefore, Pakistan, of course, is trying to build another bloc or subscribe to another bloc which has Turkey and Malaysia there. And it cannot, of course, not talk about Palestine, because if Pakistan abandons Palestine, definitely in the short to medium term, it affects what Pakistan does vis-a-vis Kashmir. So these are interconnected, very complex issues here. And so the friction between Saudi Arabia, the recent friction between Saudi Arabia and Pakistan, I see it in that context as well. Saudi Arabia is very invested in Pakistan, has been invested for decades. And therefore, one of the reasons that these groups seem to have tried to stand up again. And let me tell you, this sectarian, this particular sectarian tension is very, very interesting. It is not blown out of proportion. It's much more for signaling than for anything else, because it hasn't as yet, it didn't go to Gilgit-Baltistan, where Shias have a much more comfortable majority. And it has not really burst into the kind of violence, the hotbeds of sectarian violence. The tense, forces are tense, but it's not kind of really had a violent manifestation, which the way it happened in the past. I mean, when we talk about war and terror, and when we talk about violence in Pakistan resulting because of war and terror, we forget that in 1999, for example, there was targeted killing of Shias in Karachi, Shia lawyers and Shia doctors. There's been a lot of violence in the country. So this particular tension is dangerous, but a lot of it is signaling as well. A lot of it is geopolitical, but also geopolitical with domestic links. People who've had power, who've got money because of the way they've parroted ideology, they feel threatened by the changes that are happening, and therefore the striking backs.
Thanks. We have one final question for you. But before that, let me read some of the questions that have come in. You have answered some of them, but we want you to know what the audience has been writing about. Do you disagree with the argument that the politicization of religion began under colonial rule, that the colonial modes of organizing census data, et cetera, had started at that time? The second question is not really for you. It is that the preamble to the Canadian Constitution also says that whereas Canada is founded upon principles that recognize the supremacy of God, well, the Committee of Progressive Pakistani Canadians is not in favor of that clause, and we want it to be struck from the Constitution. Niaz Saab asks, regarding the Objectives Resolution of 1949, have you found any evidence of the Army's involvement in it?
Sorry, can you repeat this last question?
Sure.
Objective Resolution.
Yes.
49, all right.
Regarding the Objectives Resolution of 1949, have you found any evidence of the Army's involvement in its promotion? Azmat asks, the Shia-Sunni conflict was already widespread even before Zia Bhutto, which I think you have already answered, that it was in 1974 that it began.
51,
sorry. But also you mentioned that 74, the riots. Ahmed asks, on what basis does Imran Khan claim that the army accepted reductions in the defense budget? We'll come to this question in a little while. The next question by Azmat Ashraf is, do you foresee Pakistan overcoming its historic mistakes anytime? which we will come to soon. The third question is also for the future. Do you think that a popular Punjabi political leader is speaking against the military establishment? Professor Amina Jamal, she has recommended a book, while Raza Nasr's The Shia Revival, which she says is a good example or a good analysis of the Saudi Wahhabi push for the leadership of the Muslim world. And finally, again, it is for the future that we were going to ask. Shami Makhtar asks, I hope that Ayesha will propose some resolution to these renewed sectarianisms. Our last question to you is, in Pakistan right now, there is a great upsurge of the mainstream political leaders, mainstream political parties finding enough backbone, etc., to speak against the military-backed government of Imran Khan. How do you see it? That will a new civilian government, just in narrow terms, will it be doing anything regarding the sectarian question, the question of religious minorities finding a tolerant breathing space that you mentioned in your very first response? Could you elaborate, please?
Let me quickly go back to the suggestion by Professor Amina Jamal about Saudi Wahhabi, a book which Wali Nasr's, she said, which talks about Saudi Wahhabi influence. I recently wrote a chapter in a book which is edited by Christoph Jeffelo, and my chapter was looking at Saudi influence and Saudi Gulf contribution to Madrasa network. So, you know, I encourage you guys to have a look at that chapter. But, you know, one thing which I thought that I would like to leave Professor Amina Jamal with, we met once, and salams to her. I'm glad she's listening. See, we forget that, and this is something which I'm working on for my next book. See, we've always had this basis of, we've always had the basis for a particular narrative or discourse in religion, which looked at things in a certain way. You and I can agree or disagree with it, but the fact is that the tension between the sects, it's inherent. That was not sorted out. Islam being the youngest of the three Semitic religions, it has a lot of sorting out to do, a lot of debates to be had internally. So in order to arrive at a consensus where people can live much more peacefully with each other despite the different beliefs. For example, let's not forget that majority of, for example, shrines in Sindh, you know, Sindh, which we call, and therefore, you know, are surprised when something extreme happens in Sindh. Majority of shrines in Sindh are of Deobandi inclination. I can name them: Amrod Sharif, Bharchundi, P. Jhando. So, God, where is it? Yeah, sorry. So there are a number of major shrines that have Deobandi influence and inclination. And these debates have been going on. I mean, how do you know, these debates which are very internal to religion. The problem is that they have been captured so much. I mean, Allama Iqbal, I mean, his concept of a dialogue was that, you know, it's a, he talked about a consensus within the community. So much bigger discourse within the community. We don't have it. Anything which is religious has unfortunately been completely overtaken by and dominated by, by the clergy. So one of the way forward is, how do you engage with religion, and how do you how do you create this peaceful space where you can engage and talk? I mean, I personally have an issue with the progressive framework, which says you should not engage with religion. If we don't engage with religion, we cannot even imagine to think of creating that peaceful space. How would you? I mean, 220 million people in Pakistan, and then millions of people who live outside Pakistan who are kind of connected. I mean, let me tell you that I see much more intolerance in amongst the British Pakistanis. Perhaps I can find very little breathing space inside Pakistan, definitely not in the community which lives outside. So, the same is for Canada. I mean, I've seen people becoming more intolerant since they've moved to Canada, Pakistanis, than they were in Pakistan. So the point is that where millions of people, majority of people are connected with religion, progressive politics cannot deviate from that. Let me remind you that some of the initial left thinkers, Dada Amir Haider, for example, he in the earlier days he engaged with religion. He engaged with the religious discourse, and I think somewhere we have to find a way for that. Um, Now, coming to your question of what will happen, if there is a new political government in Pakistan, what will it do with the sectarian issue? Firstly, uh, I'm not. I wouldn't be, I wouldn't be jumping to a conclusion and thinking that Imran Khan government is about to go. We still have a lot of problems, and those problems are less to do with religion and more to do with sincerity of the larger political leadership to arrive at a consensus and help each other genuinely. So if you do not, I mean, if PDM is weak, then I'm sorry, it will be difficult to kind of push this particular government out. Now, let's imagine that by some stroke of luck, we have a new government. Will it bring change in the way we different sects engage with each other? The answer is no. When you have an overriding burden of instability, uh, when you have a constant fear that there is a state institution which is out to get you, and you have weakness inside on top of that, then I don't think that solving sectarian issues is at the top of your mind. You will probably sit down. You'll continue to look at it as a law and order issue. I think there are two ways that any government in Pakistan can solve it. Simply take it as a law and order issue. It means that, all right, no group will be allowed. The government itself becomes bipartisan and says, any group who engages in violence will crack down. So either that's a short-term thing, and I don't see that happening either, because these sectarian differences have infiltrated in state institutions as well. Your police, your paramilitary, your military. It also thinks in terms of these divisions. The other is have a larger base, which is get people together, allow for those conversations where over decades we are able to then build a different get on a different path and be able to, still have our differences, yet be civil and understand that we can have that conversation. One question that was asked, 49 army influence uh, in Objective Resolution 1949. I wouldn't say that army itself had a role in it, but what I can definitely say is that one of the chaps, Muhammad Ali Jinnah's PRO, who was a colonel, and I'm forgetting his name. In fact, so he was one of the people who uh, pulled out that the Muhammad Ali Jinnah's famous speech. So definitely at that point in time, whoever was the ruling elite, which would include uh, some members of the military as well, they were all in it. They were probably dedicated to giving a certain direction to the state. But as an institution, I'm not sure that military had that kind of a role then.
We have run slightly over our scheduled time for this, 1 hour, so it's 8 minutes past one. I think Ayesha has answered a lot of questions relating to this particular topic. As she points out, the country is in ferment right now. We don't know what the settlement will be. Speaking on behalf of the Committee of Progressive Pakistani Canadians, we want to thank her very, very much for her time. We had had a public meeting with her about 3 years ago in Mississauga. We hope that COVID lifts and that we can have her again here. Finally, I mean, like she said, how Pakistanis abroad are more Islamicized than the Pakistanis in Pakistan, if that's possible. And it reminds me of this joke that in Pakistan, Pakistanis look for American schools. In America, they look for Islamic schools. And for the Committee of Progressive Pakistani Canadians, as far as Pakistan is concerned, we think that the problems of the people, they are fundamental: the inflation, the unemployment, the poverty, and the illiteracy, the conditions of health, or the absence of the conditions for healthcare. And we believe that a just order is possible. We also believe that unlike Ayesha, we do believe, or at least we maintain the hope, maybe it is a very faint hope, that one day, someday, there will be secularism, there will be equality and peace for all Pakistanis, as for all of us living in the West. Again, Ayesha, thank you so very much for being with us today.
But thank you for inviting me. And let me tell you that, I hope you'll survive this Corona business. Um, I'll be very happy to imagine that Pakistan can not return, sorry, that's the wrong word. Pakistan could ever have secular values. As I said in the beginning, that even for Islamic ideology and Islamic values to grow, you need a secular state where religion is separate from politics. And I really encourage people to read Abdullah an-Naim, his work, Islam in a Secular State. It's a fantastic book. And his argument is that even the early years, the caliphate, uh, the first four caliphs were actually not using religion in politics. So I would really want this to happen. But again, as a scholar of Pakistani politics, as a scholar of state and religion, I would argue that this is not likely. especially when majority of people do not understand the significance of keeping religion away from politics. Um, we have grown up with this ideology, which was given by Maulana Maududi, that actually Maulana Maududi and it has a lot of role to play in not only influencing Hassanul Banna, but also in creating this concept that Islam as religion and politics are intertwined. Um I wish, I'm sure if he was alive, he could see that how dangerous his conception was. We need to separate the two. We need to run politics of the state uh, in a way that it doesn't, that people in power do not use religion for their own purposes to harm people even more. I wish we can get there someday, but tomorrow is not that day.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Siddiqa. For the audience, please send us your suggestions for future webinars. We'll definitely consider them. And with that, I want to again finally thank Dr. Ayesha and say goodbye to all of you. Bye-bye. Shall we end?
Yes.